text. Thank you. So we'll be looking at the actual text of the conventions, how they interplay. It's important because when we talk about this conflict that's taking place, these terms, the specific language that's used there is what is going to be important in the end. So you guys are going to be international law experts, and I'm going to try to interpret this for me because I haven't been able to find an answer yet. Talha has also worked on this a little bit, and it's quite cool. We'll also be looking at section 73, which is important because this relates to the relationship of the Vienna Convention with other international law treaties. Okay, and that's important because we have a 2008 agreement on the same subject. Now, if there is a clash between this, how do you resolve that?
The later one.
That's a very good, well, the later one would prevail. But we have a tool for this. Pakistan with General Clauses Act, which helps you interpret, or there's an interpretation section within an act which helps you interpret that particular piece of legislation. The Vienna Convention doesn't have something like that. But we have a tool under international law known as the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. And that gives that if you have successive treaties on the same subject matter, consular access पे दो treaties हैं, then that principle will apply. The one later in time is the one that prevails, because this is what the latest understanding between the parties is, right? So that's clear. We should easily win this case, right? It's not that simple. Because within the Vienna Convention, we'll go through this in a bit, you also have something that can modify the treaty, or can supplement the treaty. And then the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, it says when you're interpreting treaties, if there is something to modify or to supplement or enhance that treaty, then that should take precedence over the latter in time rule. Okay, so that becomes complicated. So we have to now determine, and we'll see if we can today, whether the 2008 agreement supplements and amends it, and does it do it lawfully? Or is it a successive treaty on the same subject matter, and then we have the later in time? So we would want, as Pakistan, that the later in time principle applies. But then it all matters on how it's interpreted. So this is a very, very complex issue, and there's not a lot of precedent on this. So this is going to be something very interesting that the ICJ is going to look at. After this, what we have is the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties. I'll go through the actual articles that deal with this. So there's Article 30. Which is that later in time principle. And then we have Article 41, agreements to modify multilateral treaties between certain of the parties. And then we have the 2008 agreement after that between Pakistan and India. And we'll go through that in a bit as well. Alright, so that's just going through the material that you have before you. Let's look at the preservation. Okay, so just look, I'm going to look at some of the facts. Then we're going to have a discussion on the ICJ. And yesterday, one or two issues were raised with the ICJ, and I wanted to clarify something. How can you go to the ICJ? The issue of the advisory opinion. What jurisdictional grounds do you have before the ICJ? What is the procedure of the ICJ? In very brief terms, we're not going to go into too much complication. And then, why has India approached the ICJ? This is something very important to look at. What is India's purpose for doing it? India has been consistently demonstrating that it does not believe in multilateralism or in that Pakistan-India issues should always be resolved bilaterally, right? So why has it approached an international organ of the UN to deal with this issue? So there are a bunch of reasons that we assess. This is my assessment. This is an RSIL assessment. This is not a, the bigwigs on TV might not be saying this, but this is what we think after looking at the case. And then some of the complications, so the stuff that we'll be looking at over here. How is this case complicated? Why is it complicated? What factors will the judges have to look at? And then the potential outcome. This is just a debate that we're going to have. After we've looked at the material, we'll see what exactly will happen in this case, and what is the worst case scenario that could happen for Pakistan, or the best case scenario there. Shall we move on? Alright, so this is a man, get to know him. Kulbhushan Sudhir Jadhav, also known as Hussain Mubarak Patel. He is a commander in the Indian Navy. We allege that he is still a commander. The Indians say no, he retired a long time ago. He's no more a commander. He was a businessman doing business on a false passport, because that's how businessmen do their business, right? On false passports. He happened to be in a city in Iran called Chabahar, which the Pakistanis have for a long time suspected is a base for Indian intelligence operations, because it's a port that the Indians are developing. So there's a reason for a lot of Indians to be there. Secondly, now the Indians aren't just developing this to allow for intelligence operations. They're doing this because they want to find an alternate route into Afghanistan. Because we don't always allow Indian goods to get through Pakistan, even though we're under a duty to allow, because a landlocked country, its surrounding countries who have access to the sea are under a duty under international law to give them access. Alright. So transit trade agreement or something. India wants to go through the Wagah border. It's a lot cheaper to send a truck to that and go across Pakistan into Afghanistan. We don't want that. We say you want to do something, use the ports. Wagah, there are a lot of issues that can come about. So a lot of explosives have been found from Indian containers that have been going through Pakistan normally as well. So there is a very serious concern that Indian goods that go through will be used against Pakistan and Pakistani interests. Anyway, let's move on. So this gentleman was arrested on the 3rd of March 2016. He was arrested in the Mashkel area of the Tehsil of Balochistan. This is in the Haran district. So that where the circle is where he's. Now you can see that borders Afghanistan. That's where he entered into, crossed into, and that's where our operations. Well, the Indians deny this. The Indians say that he was kidnapped from Chabahar, and that's what they basically are saying. So he was residing in Chabahar, Iran. It's a port city being built with Indian assistance. The allegations that the Indians use, India uses Chabahar for intelligence gathering and destabilizing Pakistan. And this is a manifestation of that. Kulbhushan Jadhav is a clear-cut manifestation of that. And we see this change in Indian policy. The Indians have been alleging that Pakistan is involved in Kashmir and sending people in, Mumbai attacks, and that we interfere in their thing. But since the Modi government came in, that has flipped. Right? They know that India's stature is changing. They want to maximize and use that to their advantage. Modi wants to be seen as a far more robust foreign policy leader, someone who develops foreign policy. So he has gone after Pakistan. He's trying to isolate Pakistan internationally, and they said that. And you have statements by their ministers and by public officials in India saying that if they try to do something in Kashmir, they will lose Balochistan. They've also said it about Sindh, and you see this more robust Indian strategy coming against Pakistan. It's very Ajit Doval. He said this in the public statements. You have videos on YouTube where he's saying that a terrorist is a mercenary. Basically, if you pay him more, you can get him to attack whoever you want.
I believe he's talking to universities.
Exactly, university students. He was discussing that with them. So you see that, and you also see a video in which Kulbhushan Jadhav tells you himself what are the areas from where India is launching these operations against Pakistan. So India has a lot of consulates along the Pakistani border in Afghanistan, and they use those as bases of operations as well as Chabahar in Iran and other places. If you have any questions, we're going to keep this as a discussion. So if you have any questions, please bring them up, discuss them here, because we have to, examine this from each side. And because I haven't had time to finalize the actual presentation in enough detail, the more you discuss, the more we can bring out elements of it. Okay. Now, another interesting fact: when he was arrested, an Indian passport in the name of Hussain Mubarak Patel was recovered from him. India confirmed that Jadhav is an Indian citizen and a former, well, they say he's a former Navy officer, and denies that he's a spy. In Pakistan, he was convicted by Field General Court-Martial to death for offences against the Official Secrets Act, under the Official Secrets Act of 1923, basically espionage. So in the media, we've been hearing about terrorism, and he is he can be tried for terrorism as well. But the actual official charges against him were based on espionage. So I think it's Section 3 of the Official Secrets Act. And consular access requests from India were denied at least 15 times. I think it's maybe 19 times now. They kept on saying, give us consular access, give us consular access, and we denied it every time. At the same time, what Pakistan has done has said, this guy is involved in terrorism, now you assist us. We want assistance from India because the same thing that India said in Mumbai attacks.
Right.
Ajmal Kasab is a Pakistani, he's attacked us, so now you help us. And we said, fine, we started a 7-year trial against Zakir Rahman Lakhvi. We gave them a lot more assistance. There were a lot of problems that they raised. For example, the evidence that they would give us was not even admissible in their own courts. Photocopies they क्या करेंगे? जो dossier की बात करते थे. That dossier would not be admissible even in an Indian court, let alone a Pakistani court. So you want us to start a criminal process based on inadmissible evidence. At least give us, the problem. So we then tried to rectify that. We sent a commission to India. And they took, statements by people. And they tried to fix it. So we gave a lot of assistance there. Then in the Pathankot attacks, our team went there as well. We went through the base, whatever amount they would let us see. And we assisted them. But now it's their turn, right? Now you would think that in such an atmosphere, they would provide assistance. So we sent them a letter of assistance, seeking their assistance. And what happened interestingly there was, if they start giving assistance to us here, what happens? We're talking about not a proxy non-state actor. We're talking about an agent of the state. Exactly. Like there would be an element there. And plus it would be very shameful because we're not asking for, like they did, accomplices of Ajmal Kasab. We're talking about raw Indian officials, like people who have positions who are known. We want access to them. So it's damaging for them in that regard, very severely damaging for India. So, and we'll go into this, one of the reasons for bringing this up at the ICJ is to delay that, is to create problems in Pakistan's requests, and to deny the ability that they can, that they have to.
Can you clear this? For example, like when we asked them for assistance in this regard, he was like a proper commissioned law officer, right?
That's what we're alleging.
That's what we allege.
Yeah.
So we are asking for assistance in terms of like finding his accomplices?
Yeah, so
okay.
When you send an intelligence operation, this is just one guy who says, oh, I will create problems in Pakistan. No, you have the entire state machinery.
Right.
Any terrorist organization similarly has the organization's machinery behind it. So for example, in the Pathankot, in Mumbai, you had these people talking on satellite phones to people who they allege were in Pakistan. Right? So it's all of the, or they were trained in Pakistan or something. So we want to know who is involved in this, who is sending people to Pakistan, who is training these individuals. And we deserve the same answers that India asked from us. Right? Answers to that.
In our case, they were non-state actors, and we realized that in their case, they are like proper state actors in terms of.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear, right? Absolutely. We're saying he's an Indian raw agent, research and analysis wing, is their spy agency.
Right.
And so we're saying he's a member of that. So let's look at.
I'm from the Carter Engineering Department of Engineering, and my cover name was Hussain Anwar, which I have taken for doing some diligence carrying for the Indian agencies. So I joined the National Defense Academy in 1987, and I subsequently joined the Indian Navy in January 1991, and was commissioned into the Indian Navy, and subsequently served for the Indian Navy till around 2001 December, when the Parliament attack occurred, and that is when I started contributing my services towards the gathering of information and intelligence within India. I live in the city of Mumbai, India. I'm still a serving officer in the Indian Navy, and will be due for retirement by 2020 as a commissioned officer. Thank you. After having completed 14 years of service by 2002, I commenced intelligence operation in 2003 and established a small business in Shahbaz in Iran. As I was able to achieve undetected existence and visits to Karachi in 2003 and 2004, and having done some basic assignments within India for RAW, I was picked up by RAW in 2013. Ever since, have been directing various activities in Balochistan and Karachi at the behest of law and deteriorating law and order situation in Karachi. I was basically the man for Mr. Anil Kumar Gupta, who is the Joint Secretary of and his contacts in Pakistan, especially in the Baluch Students Organization. My purpose was to hold meetings with Baluch insurgents and carry out activities in their collaboration. These activities have been of criminal nature, these have been of anti-national, terrorist, leading into the killing of or maiming of Pakistani citizens also. I realized during this process that RAW is involved in some activities related to the Baluch liberation movement within Pakistan and the region around it. There are finances which are led into Baluch movement through various contacts or various ways and means into the Baluch liberation. And the various activities of these Baluch liberation and the raw handlers go towards activities which are criminal, which are anti-national, which can lead to maiming or killing of people in Pakistan. And mostly these activities were centered around what I have knowledge is of course of Gadar, Pasni, Jevni, and various other installations which are around the coast, damaging the various other installations which are in Pakistan. So the activities seem to be revolving around trying to create a criminal sort of a mindset within the Baluch liberation and lead to instability within Pakistan. In my pursuit towards achieving the set targets by my handler in law, I was trying to cross over into Pakistan from the Sarawan border in Iran on 3rd March 2016 and were apprehended by the Pakistani authorities by the Pakistani side. And the main aim of this crossing over into Pakistan was to hold a meeting with the PSN personnel in Balochistan for carrying out various activities which they were supposed to undertake and carrying forward backwards the messages which they had to deliver backwards to the Indian agencies. The main issue regarding this was that they were planning to conduct some operations within the next immediate future, near future. That was to be discussed mainly, and that was the main aim of trying to come into Pakistan. So the moment I realized that my intelligence operations have been compromised on my detained in Pakistan, I revealed that I am an Indian naval officer, and it is not mentioning that I am an Indian naval officer. The total perception of the establishment of the Pakistani side changed, and they treated me very honorably and with utmost respect and due regard, and have handled me subsequently on a more professional and proper courteous way. And they have handled me in a way that befits that of an officer. And once I realized that I have been compromised in my process of intelligence operations, I decided to just kind of mess I have planned myself in, and just wanted to subsequently move on and cooperate with the authorities in removing the complications which I have landed myself and my family members. And whatever I am speaking just now, it is the truth, and it is not under any duress or pressure I am doing it. It is totally out of my own desire to mention and come clean out of this entire process which I have gone through for the last 14 years.
Alright, so this was the first confessional video that we released, a while back. This was before the case started. The Indians had objections to this saying, stating that there were 107 cuts in this apparently 6-minute video, and therefore there must have been something dodgy. This must have been under duress or coerced or something along those lines. Anyway, whatever that is, there's no answer that will come out of that. But that's him, accepting that yes, we've been involved, and he's given, quite a lot of detail. In the next video.
Like that easily they
when you're facing what you're facing, like I mean, when it's really the death penalty.
Even if he has a hope to go back to his country or he leave him, doesn't be fair. I'm sure because हमने छोड़ भी किया तो वो तो नहीं छोड़ेंगे हम.
You never know. I don't know.
What is?
He doesn't have a lot of options in this situation, right? So cooperating in that regard would put him in the best place for, say, a mercy petition later on, or to either the field general, to the army chief, or the president. And we'll go through that, what exactly processes remain.
What is the authenticity of the confessional statement? I mean, over here we say that if you give a confessional statement in say a police station, it's as good as nothing.
Yeah, it's useless.
So what is the any
The
value?
value of this, of the team statement, is so again, a confessional statement is only valid if it's done before a magistrate. Right?
Exactly.
You have laws which say that a police officer.
Internationally, what is the?
Again, if you have a domestic system, internationally you don't have criminal trials in this sense.
Yeah.
The trials that you have, the ICTY or the ICTR, you do that before a judge, right? So confessional statements may be, helpful in your case, but I mean those given before a police officer. But a confessional statement before a magistrate is what is admissible.
Yes, that's.
And there are chances when you go to a magistrate, you can recant your statement, you can take it back.
Exactly.
And there are protections in place. For example, in Pakistan, for example, you can't be put into physical remand after you've gotten the chance to make and if a chance to make a confession before a magistrate, and then you say, no, I don't want to go back, because then the police can have their way with you, right? So that becomes
That's
an
why
issue.
it's good as nothing.
Exactly. So it's completely useful. But this, apparently they're saying this was either done before a magistrate or that there was a judicial function here. Now you have to remember, this is not the normal criminal justice process that took place. Okay, we didn't put him before an ordinary civilian court. He was tried by a field general court martial. And a field general court martial, even among military tribunals, is a unique form of court martial. It's the one you do in the field in times of battle. So it's the field general. There are district general court martials, and there are other forms of court martials as well. So the one we've used for military courts in Egypt, military courts are also field general court martials. So we've applied the same particular instance of military justice here as well. Are spies tried by military tribunals? Yes, they are. Especially in times of war and in times of conflict. Is Pakistan in a time of conflict? We argue that in certain places we are in a form of non-international armed conflict, which can be internationalized when you have Indian intervention. You guys had a discussion on IHL the other day. When it comes to IHL, a spy that you capture in the battlefield, in times of conflict, in war, you can restrict his rights of communication. In fact, it is wise to do so, because his entire purpose is to gather information. So if you allow him to have communication with his own government, he can then relay that information. Now, let's look at, so what happened after this was that...
He was arrested on March 3rd. And when did he give this confession statement?
This was soon after that. He was in 2016, but this was received when? I forgot the date, but it was, I think, later last year. Late last year, like September, October, something like that. Does anybody remember when this came out? Anyway, you can Google that. Okay. So, on 8th May 2017, India approached the International Court of Justice to decide on the issue of Pakistan's continued denial of consular access to Jadhav. On 18th May 2017, ICJ grants stay from execution to India. This was a preliminary measure against Pakistan, restraining it from executing Jadhav. So, what do you think that India asked for when they applied to the ICJ? Does anybody know? Consular access, but they also had many more grounds which they hoped to get from the court. What would you, if you had one of those citizens in another country, what would you want?
Right to cross investigate or something?
Expedite to bring him back.
To bring him back,
And let him be tried.
fair trial, bring him back, basically a release, right? So that's what the Indians wanted. And that's what they've said, that we want you to release the individual. We want you to send him back. We want you to annul the proceedings that have taken place in Pakistan. and to order his release and to say that these proceedings are a joke. Can the ICJ do that? Why can't it do it?
If he chose to
Issue of jurisdiction, but what else?
we discussed on the third case, when the merits of the case, so then
Absolutely, but is it within the power of the ICJ?
binding.
Absolutely. So the issues of sovereignty that come, right? The ICJ, being an international organization, does not have the authority to release an individual who is going through a domestic process. The ICJ itself has said that we are not a criminal appellate tribunal, and this case is not. And this is extremely important. So understand this. I should have put a memory point icon up there. Remember that this is not about Kulbhushan Yadav's innocence or guilt. The case at the ICJ. He can be guilty under our system, and they can't do anything about that. What this case is about is whether India had a right to access its citizen in Pakistani detention or Pakistani jail, and whether we denied that right. So that's exactly what this entire case is. There's nothing about Kulbhushan's innocence, guilt, and that's what they're in fact banking on. Because if we had an entire case on whether Kulbhushan Yadav is innocent or guilty, we would have to then bring up evidence of Indian involvement in Pakistan. We could bring up our intelligence gathering that we've done on their operations in Pakistan. We could bring up a lot of other issues that would be very damaging to India in the international arena. But we're not going to be able to do that, despite what you might hear in the news. So I heard this absurd thing the other day that the Attorney General's office was fighting the case for Pakistan. He has said that, I will personally represent Pakistan this time, and I'm gathering material on Kashmir. Kashmir! Ye Kashmir se pakda tha apne logon ne. It has nothing to do with this, and I'll tell you what's going to happen. We're going to submit this big thick document, Kashmir violations, and the court is going to laugh at us because it is not relevant to the particular case. So India could be doing terrible things.
So what would be the time period of the stay? And during this stay?
So stays for the proceedings, jab tak final decision. Now we'll go into that why the stay is done and the process of that in a way. When you are having a murder trial of a person, आप evidence में ये तो नहीं लाते ये अपनी वादा से बड़ी बदतमीजी करता हो. They might be wrong on Kashmir, but the case here is of something else. It's of involvement in Balochistan, terrorism in Balochistan, and etc. Unless you create a nexus, which there is not, how are you going to bring this thing in? Right? What you can try to do is bring in elements regarding Balochistan involvement there, but that too is a very tall task because this is not a criminal tribunal. You don't have to show those things.
This is basically just about whether India could access its citizen or not.
What did you think about the previous person who represented Pakistan at ICJ Pakistan?
Yeah, it's Khalid Qureshi. He's a well-known barrister. He's a Queen's Counsel, which is pretty big. I haven't heard anything bad about. Well, I've heard about, but I haven't heard anything. He's a solid lawyer. He's a solid barrister. Is he the type of guy who would be ideal for such a situation? I don't know. Usually, what you do in ICJ cases is that you get like a Cambridge law professor, or you get an international law, luminary. And Pakistan's done this in the past. We've taken people like Michael Ward or Peter Becker, or these are big names in international law, and they represent your country. But the same could be said about India's law, right? They've picked just a big, short domestic law. He isn't an international expert, and you can see that in the application. It isn't based on the complexity that you can bring into such a case.
Can't you represent Pakistan in this case?
Well, you'd have to, I don't know if Pakistan can afford me. No. Yeah, it's such a busy schedule. My son gets sick every now. No, I mean, we'll be giving this advice anyway, because the government hasn't approached us. Even though, and take note, the previous case in the ICJ, this team, including myself, worked on it and we won that case. And this was with regards to the Republic of the Marshall Islands, right? So we had a lot of contact with
regards to what?
The Republic of the Marshall Islands is this tiny island nation that I'd never heard of before. Okay? They have a place called Bikini Atoll, which the Americans did nuclear testing on back in the day, in the Cold War. And on that basis, they decided to bring a case to the ICJ stating every country that has a nuclear weapon is violating a clause of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which we discussed yesterday. Right? So So the Non-Proliferation Treaty says that it has 6 pillars. One of those pillars is that countries shall enter into, there is an obligation on states to enter into negotiations for disarmament.
In good faith.
In good faith, right? That you have to get rid of your, negotiate to get rid of your weapons. And that you should make a good faith effort. It shouldn't just be, hum kar lenge, right? So they sued all the nuclear power countries.